Dust swirled in the afternoon heat, coating every boot and wagon wheel in Dry Creek's main street. The auction block was just a rickety wagon parked outside the mercantile, but the crowd gathered around it was thick and restless, eager for whatever bargains the day might bring. The sheriff stood at the side, hat pulled low, pretending his presence made the whole business legal. On the wagon, hands bound in front of her, stood Clara May. Her plain blue dress was dusty at the hem, her face pale beneath the brim of a borrowed bonnet. The auctioneer banged his gavel against the rail. "Debts must be paid. Widow's all that's left of the May ranch, and she'll work off what's owed same as any mule or cow." Laughter rolled through the men crowded closest, and a tall, scar-faced foreman from the rocking T Ranch stepped forward. "I'll start at $10, he called, his grin slow and mean. Murmurs rippled. $10 was no small sum. Clara's stomach knotted. She'd heard the stories about Jed Colter and what happened to the women who ended up under his roof. The bids came faster after that, voices rising with each number, more for sport than anything else. Some men eyed her like a prize animal, others like a burden they might win cheap just to see her humbled. Clara kept her chin up, though her heart pounded. Then, from the back of the crowd, a calm voice cut through the noise. $3. The bidding stalled. Heads turned. A broad-shouldered cowboy stepped forward, dust on his hat brim, spurs jingling softly with each step. His eyes were steady, unreadable, and the faint scar at his jawline caught the light. The auctioneer frowned. "3? She ain't scrap iron, mister. You hear the last bid?" $3, the cowboy repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Colter laughed loud enough to turn heads. "Guess she's worth more dead than to you, stranger." But the cowboy just reached into his coat, pulled $3 silver, and let them fall into the auctioneer's hand with a metallic clink that silenced the jeers. A moment later, the rope around Clara's wrists was cut, and she was guided down from the wagon. He didn't touch her roughly, didn't speak at all, just tipped his hat toward the sheriff and started walking toward the far end of town. Clara hesitated, half expecting him to grab her arm and drag her along. Instead, he paused, glanced back over his shoulder, and said in a low voice, "You're walking free beside me." For now, Clara followed him out of town, her steps slow, her heart pounding with suspicion. Men who paid money for women didn't usually walk them home like they were Sunday company. The road stretched empty, the dust settling behind them until Dry Creek was just a faint smudge in the haze. He said nothing until they reached the hitching post outside a modest, weathered cabin a mile beyond the last fence line. A single chestnut mare was tied there, a saddlebag slung over the rail. He opened the door and stood aside. "Go on in." Inside, the air was warmer, smelling faintly of wood smoke and leather. A small fire burned in the hearth, and a tin pot simmered gently on the grate. Clara kept her back straight, her hands clenched in her skirts. "If you're expecting," she began, but he cut her off with a slow shake of his head. "I'm expecting you to sit," he said simply, pointing to a wooden chair near the fire. She sat, wary, while he crossed the room and opened a small chest. From it, he drew a folded wool blanket and draped it over her shoulders without asking. The weight and warmth made her eyes sting in a way she didn't understand. Then he pulled a low stool in front of her, sat down, and without a word, reached for her hair. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice sharper than she meant. "Untangling the mess they left you in," he said, his tone calm, almost matter-of-fact. His fingers were steady as he worked through the snarls, the occasional tug softened by a quiet, "Easy now." No man had ever touched her like this, not as possession, not as demand, but as care. By the time he finished, Her hair was smooth and warm from the firelight. He separated it into sections and began to braid, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. "Why?" she asked finally, unable to keep the question in. He tied the braid off with a strip of leather before answering. "Because Jed Colter was bidding, and if he'd won, you'd be dead in a week." Her stomach tightened. "You know him?" "Better than I care to," he said, rising, "and I know the look in his eyes. Same look he had when he rode down my sister's ranch." Clara's breath caught. Whatever this man's reason for buying her, it wasn't what the crowd in Dry Creek thought. And for the first time in weeks, she realized she was warm and safe for the moment. The cabin had settled into a quiet warmth. The fire popped softly, and the smell of stew drifted from the pot on the hearth. Clara sat in the chair, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, watching the cowboy move with unhurried precision, checking the lock on the door, refilling the kettle, glancing now and then toward the single small window that looked west toward town. He hadn't given her his name yet, and she hadn't asked. Outside, the sky darkened, the wind whispering through the pines. She thought she might finally eat and rest without fear. Then she heard it, distant at first, but growing clearer. Hoofbeats, not one horse, but several, the sound of iron shoes crunching hard against frozen ground. She looked at him sharply. He was already moving, pulling the rifle from the wall and checking the chamber. "Stay away from the windows," he said quietly. "Is it him?" she asked. "Jed Colter doesn't take losing easy," he replied, his tone flat. He doused the lamp, leaving only the flicker of the fire to paint shadows on the walls. Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. The hoofbeats slowed, voices carrying through the night. "We know she's in there," one man called, his tone ugly. Another laughed. $3? You got robbed, stranger. Send her out and we'll forget this whole thing." The cowboy stepped to the window, just enough to glimpse the dark shapes moving beyond the tree line. 3 riders, all armed. "You'll eat when they're gone," he murmured. "If they ride off," she said. He glanced at her, the firelight catching the steel in his eyes. "They will." A knock, hard and deliberate, shook the door. Clara flinched, clutching the blanket tighter. "Last chance," a voice barked. The cowboy set the rifle's butt against his shoulder, eyes fixed on the door. "That was their chance," he said, almost to himself. Silence fell for a moment outside, broken only by the wind. Then the sound of boots hitting the ground told Clara the men had dismounted. Snow crunched underfoot as they approached the cabin. Her breath caught when a shadow passed the window, close enough she could have reached out and touched it. The cowboy gave her one last look, then stepped into the darker corner beside the door. The handle rattled. A hand pushed against the wood. The first man through would be stepping into the unknown. Clara's fingers tightened on the blanket, her body taut with fear. Somewhere deep inside, she knew. Whatever happened next would decide if she lived past this night. The latch clicked softly, and the door eased inward just enough for a breath of cold air to slip inside. Clara held her breath, every muscle in her body locked. The cowboy stayed perfectly still in the corner, rifle lifted, eyes fixed on the dark gap. A shadow shifted beyond the doorway, then a boot scraped against the porch. "She's in there!" a voice hissed. "I'll drag her out myself!" The door swung wider. The first man stepped through, hat low, scarf pulled over his face, revolver in hand. Before his eyes could adjust to the firelight, the cowboy's rifle roared. The man staggered backward, his weapon clattering to the porch as he crumpled into the snow. Shouts erupted outside, and the second man rushed the doorway, firing blindly. A slug splintered the chair leg beside Clara. She dove to the floor, heart hammering, the blanket tangling around her arms. The cowboy shifted, using the doorframe for cover as he fired again. A grunt and the thud of a body hitting the porch told her his shot had found its mark. "Last one'll run," the cowboy muttered under his breath. But the last man didn't run. Instead, heavy boots pounded across the porch as he slammed into the side window. Glass shattered, spraying the floor in glittering shards. Clara scrambled back as the man climbed through, knife flashing in the firelight. "You made a mistake, friend," he snarled, eyes locked on the cowboy. The cowboy's rifle was too long to swing fast at this range, so he dropped it and moved with startling speed. The two collided in the middle of the cabin, the knife arcing dangerously close to his side. Clara's fear froze for only a moment before instinct took over. She grabbed the iron poker from the hearth and swung hard, catching the attacker across the shoulder. He grunted, the blow breaking his grip enough for the cowboy to wrench the knife away. One sharp shove sent the man crashing into the wall. Before he could recover, the cowboy drove him through the shattered window, sending him sprawling into the snow outside. For a moment there was only the hiss of the fire and Clara's ragged breathing. The cowboy retrieved his rifle, glancing towards the porch. No more shadows moved in the tree line. "They'll be back," he said, his voice low but certain. "And next time, Jed will be with them." He stepped toward her, eyes scanning her face. "You hurt?" She shook her head, still gripping the poker. "No." But inside, her world had shifted, because for the first time she believed he might actually keep her alive. The fire was dying, but the room still smelled of gunpowder and cold night air. Clara's hands shook as she wrapped the blanket tighter, watching the cowboy reload with quick, precise movements. He glanced toward the door, where the snow on the porch was already darkening around the two still bodies. "We can't stay," he said simply. "Colter will come at first light with more men." She swallowed hard. "Where will we go?" He looked up from the rifle, his expression unreadable. "Somewhere he won't follow." He crossed to a shelf, pulling down a small leather bag and stuffing it with cartridges, jerky, and a coil of rope. Then he nodded toward her. "Find boots in the chest by the bed. Blanket, too. It's a long ride." Clara did as told, the reality of their flight settling in her bones. When she turned, he was at the door, scanning the shadows with the careful patience of a hunter. "We'll ride through the high pass," he said. "Snow's deep there, but it'll cut our trail." Outside, the mare waited, steam rising from her flanks in the freezing air. He saddled in silence, moving with deliberate speed, then swung up and reached a hand down for her. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was strong, pulling her up behind him with an ease that surprised her. They rode out under a sky heavy with stars, the cold biting her cheeks, the rhythm of the mare's hooves steady against the hard earth. Clara kept her head low, the blanket shielding her from the wind, but every sound in the night seemed amplified. The groan of frozen branches, the far-off call of a coyote. An hour into the ride, he slowed the mare near a creek, letting her drink while he listened to the darkness. Clara's breath fogged the air. "You've done this before," she murmured. He didn't look back. "Run. Plenty of times." "Not for a stranger." There was a pause, then a quiet reply. "You're not a stranger if Colter wants you dead." They moved on, the trees closing around them as the land began to rise. Somewhere far behind, a faint echo reached them, hoofbeats, distant but steady. He urged the mare faster. "They're coming?" she asked. "They're trying," he said, "but the pass will decide who rides out alive." Clara tightened her grip on his coat, the warmth of his back the only steady thing in a world suddenly filled with cold, shadows, and the promise of more danger before dawn. The trail narrowed as the mountains closed in, the moonlight turning the snow to a silver ribbon between walls of dark stone. The mare's breath steamed in quick bursts, hooves crunching through drifts that reached nearly to her chest. Clara clung to the cowboy's coat, her fingers numb inside the blanket. Above them, jagged peaks cut black shapes against the star-scattered sky. He slowed the mare to a careful walk, scanning the shadows that clung to the cliffside. "This is where men get clever," he murmured, "and where Colter would try to get ahead of us." Clara's pulse jumped. "Ahead of us? How?" He glanced back, his eyes steady. "There's a game trail that cuts over the ridge. If he sent a man that way—" He didn't finish the thought. Instead, he guided the mare around a bend where the path dropped into a narrow gorge. Snowmelt trickled under thin ice at the bottom, the sound muffled by the cold. Clara's breath caught when she saw movement, a faint flicker above, like a shadow sliding between boulders. He saw it too. Without a word, he swung down, pulling the rifle from its scabbard and handing her the reins. "Stay close to the wall," he told her. "If something happens, turn the mare downhill and ride. Don't stop." She wanted to argue, to say she wouldn't leave him, but the look in his eyes silenced her. He moved ahead, his boots silent in the snow, disappearing into the bend. For a moment, only the whisper of wind filled the gorge. Then came the sharp crack of a rock striking ice. Clara's heart leapt as a man burst from the shadows above, sliding down the slope with a pistol drawn. The cowboy's rifle roared, the sound echoing like thunder between the cliffs. The attacker spun, his shot going wide before he tumbled into the gorge below. But the echo of that single gunshot carried far, and it was answered almost at once, from ahead, then from behind. Clara's eyes widened. "They've got us boxed in," she shouted. He ran back to her, swinging into the saddle without breaking stride. "Not if we move now." He drove the mare forward at a gallop, snow spraying high as they tore through the gorge. Behind them, hoofbeats thundered in the dark, closing in. Ahead, the pass narrowed further, the walls rising so high they blotted out the stars. Clara tightened her hold on him, every muscle braced. Somewhere in the dark ahead, the trail would either break open to freedom or straight into the men lying in wait. The walls of the pass closed so tightly around them that Clara could have reached out and touched the rock on either side. The mare's hooves struck sparks on hidden stone under the thin crust of snow, the sound sharp in the cold air. The cowboy's posture stiffened in the saddle. "Keep your head down," he murmured, voice low and tight. Clara obeyed, hunching under the blanket. She felt, rather than saw, the moment he spotted it, shadows shifting above, too steady to be wind. The shot came from the ridge to their left, echoing through the pass. The mare lunged forward, spurred by instinct, as a bullet bit into the snow where Clara's knee had been. The cowboy's rifle was in his hands in a blink. He rose in the stirrups and fired up at the ridge, the report cracking against the stone walls. A cry answered him, followed by the thud of a body sliding down the slope. But the danger wasn't over. From the far end of the pass, two riders appeared, their horses blocking the narrow exit. The moon caught on the steel of their rifles. Clara's breath caught. "We can't go through." "We're not going through," he cut in, eyes already darting to the right where the wall sloped steeply under a crust of ice. Without warning, he yanked the mare hard toward it. The horse stumbled, then lunged up the slope, snow and rock skittering beneath her hooves. Another shot rang out from behind, splintering stone inches from Clara's head. She ducked lower, pressing her face into his back, tasting grit in the air. The mare climbed like she understood what was at stake, her muscles straining as they reached the crest above the pass. From there, Clara could see it all, the blocked trail below, the shadowy riders closing from both ends, and the pale ribbon of escape winding down the other side. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He kicked the mare into a sliding descent, snow spraying like white fire in the moonlight. A shout went up from below as the men realized they were gone. Shots followed them down the slope, but the angle was bad, the distance widening with every bound of the mare's hooves. Clara's heartbeat thundered in her ears, but as the wind rushed past, she understood. They'd slipped the trap. For now. At the bottom, the cowboy didn't slow. He bent low in the saddle, his voice barely audible over the pounding hooves. They'll come for us again at dawn. We ride until the sun touches the hills. The mare's breath came in steaming clouds, her stride steady but urgent as they left the pass behind. The moon had slid lower, painting the snow in cold silver, and the forest swallowed them in darkness broken only by starlight. Clara's arms ached from holding on, but she didn't loosen her grip. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, she half expected to see torchlight weaving between the trees. The cowboy kept the mare to a winding trail, never riding straight for long, doubling back through hollows and creeks that would confuse any tracker. His silence was purposeful, his eyes always scanning the dark. Hours passed in the muffled quiet of snow until the sound of a stream broke through the stillness. He reined in by a low-banked crossing, letting the mare drink. Clara's legs trembled as she slid down, her boots crunching in the frost. He stepped past her, scanning the trees before finally speaking. "We'll follow the stream for a mile. The water will hide our tracks." She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. "How far to where we're going?" He hesitated. "Farther than we'll make before dawn. But I know a place. A line cabin my brother built years ago. Nobody alive remembers it but me." She almost smiled at that. "Your brother?" His jaw shifted, a shadow crossing his face. "He's been gone a long time, but the cabin's still there." He took the mare's reins and started along the bank, his boots leaving shallow prints in the snow. Clara fell in beside him, the blanket slipping enough for her braid to catch the moonlight. Without thinking, he reached over and smoothed a stray strand from her cheek. "We'll rest there for a few hours," he said, "and then we ride hard for the border country. Colter won't follow that far." She wanted to believe him, but a gnawing doubt lingered. What if he does? His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Then I'll make sure he never tries again." They moved on, the quiet between them shifting from tense to something warmer. For the first time that night, she noticed the way his shoulders stayed broad and sure, the way he always kept himself between her and the dark. By the time the cabin appeared, a squat shadow tucked into a stand of pines, her fear had dulled, replaced by exhaustion and a strange sense of safety. Inside, the air was cold but dry. He lit a small fire, its glow catching the leather of the satchel at her side. She didn't miss the way his eyes lingered on it, but he said nothing. Outside, the wind shifted, and with it came the faint, distant sound of horses. The sound of horses grew clearer, threading through the wind until it was unmistakable. 3, maybe 4 riders, moving fast. The cowboy crossed the cabin in 2 strides, dousing the fire with his boot and plunging the room into shadows. "They tracked us," Clara whispered, clutching the blanket tighter. "Or they never lost us," he said flatly, moving to the small window cut into the wall. Moonlight spilled through, enough for him to see shapes weaving between the pines, the pale steam of the horse's breath drifting in the cold. He turned to her, voice low and calm. "You remember the stream behind the cabin?" She nodded. "If I tell you, take the mare and follow it north. Don't stop until you reach open ground." Clara's eyes widened. "And you?" "I'll hold them off." He reached for his rifle, checking the chamber with practiced ease. She shook her head, stepping closer. "You bought me to save me from Colter. I'm not running just to let you die in his place." He gave her a long look, steady, unreadable, before glancing back toward the window. "Then stay out of the line of fire." The first shot came without warning, shattering the small window. Wood splinters flew, and Clara ducked behind the table as he returned fire, the rifle's crack echoing through the pines. Shouts rang out as the riders split, two circling wide, one charging straight for the front. The cowboy shifted position, covering the door. The hinges groaned as a boot slammed against it. Clara spotted movement at the back wall, a shadow rising in the moonlight. Someone was climbing onto the roof. "Above you!" she shouted. He pivoted, firing through the ceiling boards. A heavy thud followed, then silence. The door burst open, a figure lunging inside with a pistol raised. Before he could fire, Clara grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth and swung with all her strength. The man dropped, groaning, his weapon skittering across the floor. "Good swing," the cowboy muttered, pulling her back toward cover. More gunfire erupted outside, bullets chewing into the logs. Then came a familiar voice, Colter's, drawling through the night. "Hand her over and I might let you keep breathing, friend." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he told Clara, his voice low, almost gentle. "No matter what happens." She watched him move toward the doorway, the moonlight catching the edge of his profile, and realized with a twist in her chest, he wasn't just protecting her. He was ready to end this, no matter the cost. Colter's voice carried through the still night, dripping with smug certainty. $3 bought you a whole mess of trouble, cowboy. Walk away now, and maybe I'll only take her." The cowboy stepped into the doorway, rifle loose in his hands but ready. Moonlight glinted off the barrel, his breath steady in the cold. "You had your chance, Colter," he called back. "Now you're riding home alone, if you ride home at all." A laugh rolled out from the trees, then the sharp crack of a rifle. The cowboy ducked back as a bullet punched into the doorframe. He moved quick, slipping out the side and circling toward the sound. Clara stayed low inside, clutching the poker, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She could hear movement all around, boots crunching snow, the creak of saddle leather, the quick snort of a restless horse. Then came a shout, followed by the cowboy's rifle barking twice in rapid succession. A man cursed loud and fell silent. "You always were a coward hiding behind a gun," Colter's voice roared. "Step out and face me." The cowboy's answer was quiet but carried. "You first." For a moment, the forest went still. Then Colter burst from behind a pine, revolver in hand, charging toward the cabin. Clara's warning caught in her throat as the cowboy appeared from the shadows behind him, moving fast and silent. Colter spun just in time to see the butt of the rifle swing up. The blow sent his gun flying, his knees buckling into the snow. The cowboy's boot came down on the revolver before Colter could grab it. "This is for my sister," he said, his voice low enough only Colter could hear. The next moment was quick, a sharp crack of the rifle stock against Colter's jaw. The man dropped, limp in the snow. The two remaining riders bolted at the sight, spurring their horses hard into the night. The cowboy stood over Colter for a long breath, making sure he stayed down, before turning back toward the cabin. Clara was already at the door, eyes wide with relief and something else, something warmer. "It's over?" she asked. "It's over," he said, though his voice carried the weight of miles yet to ride. He stepped past her, retrieving his hat from the table. "You can stay here until morning, then ride wherever you want. You're free now." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I think I'll stay, for now." His gaze softened, and he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then sit by the fire, he murmured, and I'll braid your hair again. Proper this time. Outside, the moon slid lower, the snow gleaming like silver as the cabin's warmth finally swallowed the night.